Live from London, this is BBC News. In an interview with the BBC, the leader of Sudan's paramilitary RSF denies firing the first shot and lays out his conditions for negotiations. Another wave of Russian airstrikes in Ukraine leaves at least 19 people dead. And in India, are vigilante cow protection groups targeting Muslims? Stay with us to hear more about the story. Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim. Welcome to BBC News. We start in Sudan, a story we've been following closely for the past 2 weeks. The crisis continues as the army and the rival militia group accuse each other of breaking an extended ceasefire. This as thousands of people, Sudanese as well as many other nationalities, continue to attempt to flee the country. Let's just show you some pictures of the situation in the capital, Khartoum, today. Well, as you can see, plumes of smoke. We're also hearing reports of violence and looting in the Darfur region. We'll be speaking to a former governor of Darfur a little later in the programme. And as people continue to flee, some have found the journey more difficult than others. In a moment, we'll speak to a doctor who's currently trying to escape the country through the north. But first, my colleague Zainab Badawi, who herself is British Sudanese, has spoken to the head of the militia group, the Rapid Support Forces. In Sudan, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. Have a listen.
Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to this phone interview, General Dagalo. I want to put it to you that the people of Sudan, particularly in the capital Khartoum, are living in an absolute ordeal. What would it take for you to allow humanitarian corridors?
First of all, I'd like to thank the BBC for the interview regarding the truce. We have been asking for it from the first day of the war. We started the humanitarian corridor straight away. We opened these corridors within the areas controlled by our forces. We started the truce from our side. We are working for the sake of the civilians, and our fight is on the behalf of the civilians. We have no problems with these corridors, and we are helping the diplomatic missions. The Sudanese people acknowledge the areas under our control. We are working hands and feet to help others. We have no problem with these corridors whatsoever.
Well, that was Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. He is the head of the RSF, and my colleague Zainab Badawi was speaking to him there. We are trying to establish contact with people on the ground, and as soon as we do get them, we will be going to them. Now, here's more of what he said on how the recent conflict began. Have a listen.
Who fired the first shot in this conflict?
We did not fire the first shot. All the mediators were present. We agreed to sit down at 10 a.m. and sign the final agreement. We were taken by surprise when we found that the country was shut down and all the bridges were under siege. They started to fire on us. At the moment, we are fighting to defend ourselves. We don't shoot our own people. This army is our army. They are our brothers. We should not fight with them. But since Al-Burhan is not trustworthy and is a traitor, this war destroys Sudan.
That was Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo speaking to Zainab Badawi there. We are following that story very closely and we'll return to it a little later in the programme. Turning to Ukraine now, where at least 19 people have been killed by a new wave of Russian missile strikes. A child was among the dead after a block of flats was hit in the city of Uman. This is the scene in one of those cities in central Ukraine after a building was apparently hit by a missile. Rescue operations are underway to search for survivors. The capital, Kyiv, was also targeted for the first time in more than 50 days. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the attacks as evil, which could be stopped by weapons. Kyiv's defense minister says preparations are concluding for a long-awaited spring offensive. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Yuri Sak, advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense. Mr. Sak, good to see you. We often talk while you are in Ukraine, and you're in London at the moment. Terrible day for Ukraine. We haven't seen this level of violence for some time now.
Yes, Yelda, indeed, this is a very terrible day, and I'm afraid the figures have become even worse. 23 people were killed in the relatively small town of Uman, and among them there are 4 children. So this is another reminder that we are dealing with a terrorist state. And, you know, incidentally, only yesterday the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has recognized Russia's actions as genocide. And today, as if to prove their title, they're committing this new atrocity. And like you've said in your reports, indeed, we know how to stop this. We know how to stop death and destruction in Ukraine and elsewhere. We just need the weapons. We need the air defense systems at this stage, and at this critical stage of the war, we need fighter jets, F-16.
But are the weapons are starting to arrive?
The weapons have never stopped arriving, put it that way. But this is the most intense warfare since the Second World War. This is why, you know, whatever arrives is immediately deployed on the battlefield. And of course, we are now preparing for our counteroffensive. And for us to be successful, we need to be very well prepared. This is what our Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, keeps repeating. We are nearly there. We are prepared. We are determined. We want to stop this war. This is not a war for territories. This is not a war even for cities. This is the freedom war. This is the war for our shared values. And we're essentially asking our allies to give us weapons to protect our shared home.
That hasn't changed, though. I mean, the allies have shown that level of support. In terms of a spring offensive, has that now started?
Well, look, spring offensive, we need to understand. This is not an event that will begin at the blow of the whistle. This is a multitude of different, very complex operations. Some of them are already underway. You know, we are fighting a smart war, and our military command is very good at planning our military operations. And of course, the details are not disclosed for obvious reasons, because if you want to succeed, you need to maintain the element of surprise.
In Kharkiv, there was an element of surprise that the Russians were tired, they were outnumbered, it didn't go well for them. Do you think, though, this time round they're more prepared?
Well, look, they have been conducting their mobilization for a long time. They have been deploying more soldiers on the front lines. But today's another massive missile attack on our cities, proves that Russia is a paper tiger. This is why they are conducting these missile strikes, because they are unable to do anything on the battlefield, to achieve any success. They have been trying to gain control of a small city of Bakhmut for more than 6 months now. And Bakhmut has become a black hole for them. They are taking staggering losses. On a daily basis, on average, they are losing about 500 wounded and killed in action in that city alone. So, you know, whatever they have been trying to prepare, we will be better prepared because we have the support of our allies, we have great working and efficient command and control, and we have the determination to liberate our land.
But for as long as that support from the allies continues, that's key to this, isn't it?
Well, we are assured, and we see this in the action of our allies, that this is unwavering support. Our allies are committed to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. But we continue to say that we need to all change our mindset from to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes to achieving victory as soon as possible. That's the key message. That's the shift that we need to achieve in our minds. And
are you seeing that shift? Because you're here in London, you're obviously meeting officials.
Well, yes, exactly. Just a few days ago almost, right? There was the Ramstein meeting held at the Ramstein airfield in Germany. And in fact, during that meeting, our minister, when he came back, he said that, look, I can see that most of our allies are now confident in Ukraine's victory, and everything is being done now, you know, from the supply of ammunition to tanks, heavy artillery, to help Ukraine achieve that goal. But we always say that we need to be, all of us, as the coalition of free nations, we need to be one step ahead of our enemy, not one step behind.
Do you currently feel like you're one step behind?
On some positions, yes.
Like what?
Like, for example, the fighter jets. Now, this is an issue that has been discussed for such a long time now. And the training of we understand it's not an easy process. We understand that Air Force capability is not deliverable overnight. But at the same time, certain things such as training of Ukrainian pilots could have started a long time ago. Look, there are 4,000 F-16s around the world between our allies. Now, we are asking just at this stage for 440. So it's 1% of the whole fleet worldwide. So
they've been saying, they've said no about tanks and then they delivered.
Absolutely.
Do you think that they've been saying no about the jets, but they will deliver?
Impossible is possible. It only takes a little longer. We have seen this. And like you said, Patriots, heavy artillery, you know, we've started with Javelins and Stingers, even they were not possible. And now we have almost everything, but we need fighter jets to complete our air defense systems. Because look, Russians are taking off 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian airspace, launching gliding air bombs, and we at the moment have nothing to scare them away with, to deal with them, right? So if we have fighter jets of fourth generation F-16s, Russians wouldn't dare even to take off.
I mean, Volodymyr Zelensky came to London and made this very point.
Wings for freedom.
Yeah, and he handed that fighter jet helmet.
Yes.
Do you think they're listening, though? Is the mindset shifting and changing, do you think?
It's shifting every day, but, you know, in different countries at different pace. We are doing all we can to convince our allies to step up their efforts. And unfortunately, tragic events like the one today will facilitate the process. Because
do you think the mood music in the United States is changing? The Biden administration is continuing to show support, but we are hearing certain things across the political spectrum. If the political landscape in the US changes, do you think support for Ukraine will change?
In the United States of America today, despite the discussions that could be taking place within the political circles, there is still a very strong bipartisan support, and we are confident that it will continue because there is a very good understanding of the threat that a terrorist state like Russia poses. Look, Russia is getting support and Iranian drones from Iran. It is very obvious. Russia is beheading people. It's acting like ISIS. So it is very clear what kind of threat we are dealing with. This is why, despite certain discussions which could be happening, and it's normal in a democratic society to have different opinions, but when it comes to understanding the threats and understanding the need to stand with Ukraine until our full victory, I think the bipartisan support will stay there and it will not disappear.
What's the end game?
The end game is the complete liberation of Ukrainian territories, including Crimea.
Do you think that's going to happen, though?
That's going to happen, absolutely. Look, in 2014, when Crimea was annexed illegally, there was no international reaction, and we didn't fight back. And we see now what it led to. It led to today's missile strikes and the killing of 4 children. Because impunity, if it goes unpunished, comes back, you know, and it becomes even bigger. So we are determined now to complete this once and for all. Retake our territories, bring Russia to justice, set up an international war crimes tribunal and bring to justice every criminal who is responsible for these atrocities. And this is the only path to a peaceful and stable Ukraine, as well as Europe and world.
Yuri Sachs, good to see you in London. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go back now to Sudan and to my colleague Zainab Badawi, who's spoken to the head of the militia group, the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. Just a reminder of what he had to say. Just take a listen again.
Who fired the first shot in this conflict?
We did not fire the first shot. All the mediators were present. We agreed to sit down at 10 a.m. and sign the final agreement. We were taken by surprise when we found that the country was shut down and all the bridges were under siege. They started to fire on us. At the moment, we are fighting to defend ourselves. We don't shoot our own people. This army is our army. They are our brothers. We should not fight with them. But since Al-Burhan is not trustworthy and is a traitor, this war destroys Sudan.
That's Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo speaking to my colleague Zainab Badawi there. Let's go live now to Timothy Carney. He served as the US ambassador to Sudan under President Bill Clinton. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us here on the program. We're just hearing there from General Hameti, someone that you are familiar with. He was shifting the blame on the other side to General Burhan. This is something that we have continually heard over the last 2 weeks, with 50 million Sudanese stuck in between these two warring generals.
Well, the blame is plenty to go around to both Hameti and General Burhan. No question about that. It's a search for power. It's a question of economics. It's a fear of having to be held accountable for the violations and crimes that the military and paramilitary have committed over the past 2 years and more. Hard to apportion blame here. That's not the point. The point now is to bring the conflict to an end, get them around a table, and establish a stable truce leading to a ceasefire that will ultimately lead to a return to civilian governance in Sudan.
I mean, these ceasefires that we've been seeing have been so fragile. They've virtually been breaking as soon as they've basically been decided on, although in the last 72 hours we have seen evacuations as a result of the ceasefire, and there have been desperate attempts by the UN, by the US, by neighbouring countries to bring the two sides to the negotiating table. Do you think they will listen?
I think what our best chance now is from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, which has a peace mission, a mediation mission, rather, underway through the auspices of the president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir, and his colleagues in Kenya and Djibouti. Salva has contacted both Hameti and Burhan. He has suggested that they extend the truce that ended last night. And yes, they are patchy, no question about that, but that they send delegations to Juba, the capital of South Sudan, to begin to try to sort this thing out.
It's quite extraordinary to think that the leader of South Sudan is trying to bring these warring sides together, given their own history.
There's a huge irony there. I must admit it. I mean, the fact that you would have Salva Kiir and Riek Machar almost cloned by Hameti and Burhan in the north. The only big difference in the four men is that in the south there's the ethnic dimension of the Denka ethnic group versus the newer ethnic group as well. But if they can finally come to some sort of agreement, thanks to the neighbors, I have no doubt that people in Khartoum in the north can actually reach agreement as well. But it's going to take more pressure, maybe sanctions, including a prohibition on military equipment to Sudan itself, possibly sanctions on individuals. The problem with sanctions, of course, everybody has to agree to enforce them.
And part of the problem with that, of course, is there is so much outside interference, so many different players who have a stake in either one or the other, although they all seem to be treading quite carefully at the moment.
You've got it absolutely right. And in that context, there's an article in the recent issue of Foreign Affairs by one of the leading academics on Sudanese matters, Alex DeWall, who notes that at this point, and it may be a short period of time, a fragile period of time, the international community wants to see an end to the conflict.
Ambassador Carney, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Welcome.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
They're simple, not entirely without pain, but involve little more than rolling up your sleeve and looking away. Now it's hoped that a blood test could help speed up the process of diagnosing and treating lung cancer, a far cry from the current option.
A lung physician will go with bronchoscope and goes into a camera test inside of your lungs and try to take a tissue of that lung, depending where it is. The other option is to do it with CT guided biopsy, so there are interventional radiologists will go up from outside with a needle to your lung. Patients in Wales are diagnosed at advanced stage 3, stage 4, and with poor outcomes. And sometimes they become too unwell or even die before we can get the test results to them.
The team at the All Wales Medical Genetics Service in Cardiff are now conducting trials involving patients with stage 3 and 4 lung cancer, with the hope that in the future a blood test alone can replace invasive tissue biopsies.
You're live with BBC News. I'm Yalda Hakim. Let's go to India now, where a spate of killings has reignited a debate about whether laws designed to protect cows, an animal held sacred by the country's Hindu majority, are being used to target Muslims. Vigilante cow protection groups, which are often linked to right-wing Hindu factions, say they're helping the police to enforce laws banning the slaughter of cattle. But they've been blamed for a number of recent high-profile deaths, as our correspondent Leila Natu reports from the North Indian state of Haryana.
These roads hold many stories. By night, Pradeep and his men scan them for trucks that could be carrying cows or beef. Tonight, none are on his radar. But he shows us where, just days ago, they found a container packed with cattle.
So how did you come to know that the truck would be travelling on this road?
He had his informants, he says, so they stopped the truck and called police. Here in Haryana, the slaughter of cows is illegal, and bands of Hindu men patrol the highways to stop any of the animals they hold so sacred being led to their deaths.
We get angry, but we also felt happy that we saved them from getting slaughtered. It is a great feeling that we did something good.
Across the state, another cow protector, Monu Manesar, has long been boasting about his work online, posting videos of chases and encounters like these. But he is now a suspect in the recent murder of 2 men, Junaid and Nasir, whose burnt remains were found in this car wreckage. They'd set off from this village in Rajasthan, now quietly grieving for 2 of its own. Junaid's wife, Sajida, is wrestling with what happened.
Their bodies were bought in a bag. It was ashes, there was nothing else. Just a handful of ashes and a few bones.
The killings have captured attention across India, jogging memories of a previous wave of violence linked to cow vigilantes. Indian Muslims here fear they're being targeted by the groups who are linked to right-wing Hindu factions. And we found evidence of another possible victim. Waris died after being involved in a car crash. It was captured on CCTV. Moments later, a group was filmed pulling a cow from the car. A video of Waris, alive and being questioned, was streamed live on the Facebook account of notorious vigilante Monu Manesar that night.
You are facing charges.
Shauqeen had been travelling in the same car. He claims they were chased by a cow protection group who beat them up so badly that Waris died from his injuries.
It was not an accident. He was killed. They are targeting Muslims. There was not a single injury from the crash.
Monu Manesar denies involvement in any of the deaths, and police say they're not investigating Waris's case. There is a sprawling cow protection network in this part of northern India. At this shelter for rescued cows, we meet senior figures in the movement.
But what do you say to people who say that you are taking the law into your own hands and actually this matter should be one for police?
If someone harasses a woman, should we wait for police? Our enemy is the cow smuggler, not just any Muslim.
Families seeking justice, while India's cow protection squads are under scrutiny. Leila Nathu, BBC News in Haryana.
And there's more on that story on our website, so do go to the usual place, bbc.co.uk. Now, a zoo in Hamburg has released pictures of a polar bear cub that was born there in December. The cub is the offspring of a polar bear called Victoria, who was born at Tierpark Hagenbeck Zoo 21 years ago. Proof, the zoo said, that its breeding program to save this endangered species is paying off. The young polar bear so far seems healthy, lively and alert. It's not yet clear when visitors will be able to see the cub. Until then, a monitor will be installed at the polar bear enclosure so that all visitors can observe the cub inside the facility. Really adorable pictures of that baby cub there, being very playful with its mother. Now, of course, we are following the story of Sudan very closely. As you saw, my colleague Zainab Badawi interviewed the leader of the RSF, General Hameti. We'll have much more coverage in the next few minutes of that continued ceasefire, as well as analysis here on BBC News. Stay with us.
Hello there. Extreme heat has been affecting Spain and Portugal with new April national temperature records set for both. Cordoba getting up to 38.8 degrees Celsius on Thursday, and in Portugal, Moura getting up to 36.9 degrees Celsius. Now, heading into the weekend, although it's going to be sunny, still with temperatures well above average for southern parts of Spain and Portugal, temperatures won't be as high as they have been over recent days, generally into the low to mid 30s in the hottest areas. Now, across Italy, we'll start to see a few showers and thunderstorms break out on Saturday. Certainly a lot of thunderstorms around across northern areas of Spain, a few for northern Portugal and southern France as well. Heading a bit further northwards with some brighter skies across England, Wales, France, Belgium, Netherlands and parts of Germany. Temperatures will be coming up a little bit higher compared with recent days, so it's going to start to feel a little bit warmer. That said, there will still be some showers around, and that's certainly the case as we head into Sunday as well, with storms becoming a bit more widespread across the western side of France. Fewer showers into Spain and Portugal, but temperatures easing back further. 25 degrees, the top temperature in Madrid. Now, the outlook over the next few days, notice how temperatures do build again in Spain. We'll see highs in Madrid reaching 30 degrees towards the middle of next week. In Kyiv, some pleasant spells of sunshine over the next few days. You might see a few showers, though, into the middle of next week.
Now showing on BBC Real.
Privuklo odmah našu pažnju su malene kašičice izrađene od kosti, kojih ima kroz čitav neolitski svet na hiljade i hiljade. Zapravo smo pokazali da su tragovi na kašičicama zapravo tragovi mlečnih zuba. Za nas je to bilo izuzetno otkriće, ne samo zbog toga što smo pokazali da je ovaj predmet upotrebljavan u ishrani beba. Neolitske mame po prvi put u evoluciji čovečanstva mogle da imaju više dece nego bilo koja prethodna majka u praistoriji.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician. You read the polls.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah,
I
you are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
you are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk on BBC News.
On top of this kind of rubble, rescuers are using their bare hands. You can see them throwing down blocks and trying to search desperately for survivors.
Small arms fire as well as heavy artillery fire, which means that the Russian lines are very close.
This is as close as we've been able to get today to the explosion. It happened inside the police compound just behind me.
This is a bus that's carrying some of the people
that were detained following the riot.
These were people's homes. They were newly built. But look at it now. 80% of this village is gone.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
This is BBC News, the headlines. In Sudan, doctors say at least 74 people have been killed during 2 days of fighting in the Darfur region. In Hungary, Pope Francis is carrying out one of his most politically sensitive trips, urging Europe not to fall prey to populism. And the former British Paralympian John McFall embarks on a new project to see if an astronaut with a physical disability can live and work in space. The chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, has announced he's resigning after admitting that he breached the British government's code for public appointments. A report found that Mr Sharp failed to properly disclose his involvement in facilitating a loan of £800,000 for the UK's former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. This morning, Mr Sharp released this statement.
Mr Heppenstall's view is that while I did breach the governance code for public appointments, he states very clearly that a breach does not necessarily invalidate an appointment. Indeed, I've always maintained the breach was inadvertent and not material, which the facts he lays out substantiate. The Secretary of State has consulted with the BBC board, who support that view. Nevertheless, I have decided that it is right to prioritise the interest of the BBC. I feel that this matter may well be a distraction from the corporation's good work were I to remain in post until the end of my term. I have, therefore, this morning, resigned as the BBC chair to the Secretary of State and to the board.
That was Richard Sharp there. Well, let's just remind ourselves of the events. Richard Sharp was appointed chairman of the BBC in February 2021. At the start of this year, the Sunday Times reported he'd been accused by MPs for failing to properly disclose his involvement in facilitating an almost $1 million loan guaranteed for Boris Johnson just weeks before the then Prime Minister recommended Mr Sharp for the BBC job. His appointment was investigated over his relationship with the then Prime Minister. There was added pressure for the BBC chairman to resign amid the Gary Lineker impartiality row last month. Richard Sharp denies any wrongdoing. Well, let's go live now to our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson. And Rob, it's been a hugely significant day for the BBC. Just help our global audience better understand the story.
Well, it really matters for lots of reasons. I mean, number one, if I could start with here in the UK, it's just one can't overstate just the role that Britain plays in the sort of national life of the UK, kind of culturally, in terms of news. It's often used as a bit of a political football, of course, in this country. So it's hugely important here. And of course, the reason why it's mattered is that the allegation has come that, never mind the particular details of the case that you just went through, that somehow the problem for the BBC is that its critics would say, how could you really be impartial when you have a chairman who's got this closer ties to the Conservative Party? So that's, entirely regardless of this particular issue that has led to his resignation. So that's the charge. I mean, of course, the BBC, as you know, Yalda, would say, look, this is completely unfair in the sense that the chairman of the BBC, he's not like an editor-in-chief. Richard Sharp doesn't tell you, he doesn't tell me what to say, he doesn't determine the running orders of our programmes. And I think the BBC would also make the case, and no doubt Mr Sharp would, that, look, even if you've had past political contacts, and other chairmen have had past political contacts, like us, Yalda, the non-executives, these sort of senior figures, are also supposed to leave any political beliefs and don that cloak of impartiality, if I could put it, when they get in.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of part of the values and ethos and what the organisation prides itself on, that it leaves, all of that at the door, and we walk in and we're impartial, essentially, in terms of everything that we represent.
Yes, that's the whole idea, that the BBC's #1 selling point, both here in the UK and of course globally, is that we don't take sides. I mean, that's what's meant by impartiality, that we say things which are sometimes unpleasant to powerful people, not always powerful people, to governments, that we simply don't care. And so the sort of concern, and that concern has been shared by some senior figures within the BBC, most of it privately, Yalda, is that, look, you know, even if nothing has gone wrong in this case concerning Mr. Sharp, it's just the issue of perception, that it just, as some colleagues would say, it just doesn't look good, that many people would think, hang on a minute, is the head of the BBC a Conservative? Now, again, I'm kind of restating that Mr. Sharp would strongly dispute that, and the BBC would say that was entirely unfair, that he is not editor-in-chief, and that whatever happens, those of us at the BBC doing these sort of day-to-day jobs get on with our impartial job. A little bit of a plea there for what we do.
I mean, it's exactly that, what you just said. It's perception. So that leads me to the question of how much damage then all of this has done to the organisation, because it's not just about this incident. You know, I mentioned there the Gary Lineker row as well. It all sort of, that was almost like, you know, the final straw, if you may, with this whole saga.
Well, of course, it's very difficult to measure these things, but I suppose if you had to turn to something, there was a survey of trust done by a polling organisation in this country called YouGov in January, and the sort of bad news for the BBC is that trust in the BBC has gone down since the last time it was measured. But on the other hand, the good news is that we are still, you know, far more trusted than any other news organisation in this country, and the sort of trust in the BBC stands up pretty well around the world. So absolutely no cause for complacency. But I mean, clearly, I guess clearly these things, you know, issues like Mr. Sharp and others, you mentioned Gary Lineker, do present a challenge. And there's something else. I mean, there's something else that transcends all of this. And that is that we live not just in this country, but obviously around the world, in an increasingly polarized world where people have very strong feelings, partly sort of motivated by social media. So in many ways, the BBC's impartiality, if you have very strong views about stuff, we don't look impartial, right? I mean, if you have a strong feeling about Donald Trump, about Brexit, about Russia, about Ukraine, you know, then the impartiality of the BBC looks sort of partial. So the BBC has all sorts of challenges, but considers that.
Exactly. I'm being told to move on, but I just want to squeeze in this question, because it does raise all those questions about democracy and legacy media and its role in this ever-changing landscape.
Well, seeing as we're pressed for time, I'm just going to refer to one other survey that was done by the Reuters Institute here in Oxford, which does suggest that here in the UK and around the world, there is a market. People do want news which is impartial and which is balanced and fair. So hopefully there is a future.
Rob,
am I allowed to say that?
Rob, thank you so much, as always. Now, the Pope has begun a 3-day official visit to Hungary, seen as one of the more politically sensitive trips of his career. Here he is, meeting with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. In his first major speech in Budapest, Pope Francis warned of the dangers of nationalism and called for a more welcoming attitude to refugees. That's in stark contrast to the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's often criticised immigration to Europe. Well, live now to Budapest, and let's speak to Stefano Bottoni, Associate Professor of History at the University of Florence. Thank you, Mr. Bottoni, for joining us here on the programme. So the Pope has returned to Budapest, although his last trip was quite quick. How has this been received and also perceived?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. This trip is very different from the last one Pope made in Hungary in 2021. It is a much longer trip, 3 days instead of a couple of hours, and it has been very carefully crafted and organized and prepared by Viktor Orban's government, and the expectations for this trip are very high. The Pope will visit several places in Budapest, already had meetings with President Katalin Novak and Viktor Orban himself, also made a family picture with Viktor Orban. And the presence of the Pope in Hungary will be probably exploited for political purposes by the government, since they have invested very much political and diplomatic capital into the organization of this
Are
visit.
they already doing that? Because there are many critics who say, you know, this is a bit of a coup for Viktor Orban's government.
Well, I think that the game changer event between the last visit in 2021 and this one has been Russian aggression onto Ukraine and the political diplomatic answer given both by the Holy See and Viktor Orban's Hungary. Both have stressed discourse on peace talks, and peace initiatives, always avoiding blaming clearly and equivocally Russia as the aggressor. And
In fact, Viktor Orban has at times been accused of being pro-Putin.
Yes, and I think that this is the tricky part from a diplomatic point of view of Pope Francis' visit to Hungary, because he will need to avoid giving the impression that he is endorsing, basically, Viktor Orban's peace camp or pro-Putin peace camp or peace rhetorics. And it won't be an easy task, because the Hungarian government has mobilized hundreds of thousands of people, not all of them Catholics, to a kind of party duty, especially to attend Sunday mornings papal mass in downtown Kossuth Square.
Are you saying that his presence alone, regardless of how the Pope would like to frame this and how noble his cause might be, that Viktor Orban, his government, will portray this in their way?
Yes, this is precisely how they operate, and they have been rather successful. And I think that we have to see, and I'm a historian as a profession, the evolution of the relationship between the Holy See and Viktor Orban's Hungary. And we can see that since 2015 to 2020, during the migration crisis, bilateral relationships were absent or quite bad. They only started to improve upon the first papal visit to Hungary in 2021. But since the Russian aggression to Ukraine, Hungary's effort towards the Vatican intensified. And I think that this new papal visit now is really the result Viktor Orban was expecting from these diplomatic efforts.
Even though essentially the values of the Pope differ from that of Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban has often, put in place anti-immigration policies. The Pope is in Hungary. He's planning on meeting refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan. Is that in itself an attempt to make a point?
I think that this part of the Pope's program is taken for granted in Hungary and in government circles. So they accept the fact that the Pope will stress some of these points. But I think that the political value of these points stressed now by the Pope is very different from when they were stressed by the Pope in 2015, 2016, or even 2021. So I think that now, politically speaking, from the Hungarian side, it is much more valuable that the Pope will spend 3 days in Hungary, will speak a lot, and he's already speaking a lot about traditional values, family, natality, demography, and all these are issues which are very, very close to the sensitivity of the Hungarian government, very close to the official rhetoric of the Hungarian government. So, in fact, they can be perceived as an endorsement, even if they are probably not.
Stefano Bottoni, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Let's return to Sudan now, where doctors say at least 74 people have been killed during 2 days of fighting in the Darfur region in the west of the country. Despite agreeing to extend a ceasefire by 3 days, the army and the rival paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, have been fighting each other in the city of El Janina in West Darfur. There are reports that fighters have looted and torched markets, aid warehouses and banks in the city. The area was already home to tens of thousands of people who'd been displaced by conflict. Well, for more on this, we can go straight to Darfur now and speak to Adib Yusuf, the former governor of Central Darfur. He joins us now live from the city of Zelingay. Thank you very much, Governor, for joining us here on the programme. I know the line is quite ropey, but we will try and persevere. Just tell us about what's happening in Darfur. We understand that fighting has erupted there and people have been killed.
Yeah, thank you for having me. The tragedy in Darfur, that the conflict here, it looks more of ethnic conflict than political conflict. And this has been very clear in the city of Jenena of West Darfur, whereby dozens of innocent civilians were killed. Banks, UN agencies, international organizations, government offices and markets were looted. And our much concern, or the biggest concern that we are thinking about in West Darfur and across Darfur is the protection of civilians. So this represents the biggest challenge in Darfur and in other parts of Sudan as well. But in Darfur, because there's already grievances against some Arab groups and some Arab groups against the Africans from the previous conflict.
Governor, you just spoke about some of the looting and the fighting that's taking place. I just want to show our viewers this footage that came in of a RSF fighter. And you can just see this footage here. That's a police vehicle that's burning. This is after the police headquarters was raided, and I believe the head of the police department there was also killed. So this is really, these militia groups, Governor, they seem to be taking advantage of this vacuum, this power vacuum that has been created as a result of the fighting.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, the one that was killed, the deputy police director in West Darfur, and the vacuum of the government and the sense of no government in Darfur generally and in West Darfur specifically create this chaotic situation whereby looting of government premises, government offices and UN agencies premises, as well as markets and banks. It happened because of this vacuum. The irony and the tragedy is that civilian protection remain the biggest challenge. There's some gathering centers were burned, IDP centers was also burned, and there's no one to protect them. So there's no sense of government. And civilians they lost hope because
we know, Governor. Governor, we know that the UN was present in that area, as were aid agencies. Are they still there in Darfur?
No, the UN staff, the UN staff, they have already evacuated all their staff from all parts of Darfur. Either they evacuate their staff to Chad or to South Sudan in Juba. So this is in the recent conflict. But the problem is that the UNIMIT, which supposed to protect the people, they are no longer here. So there's no UN body that can help in protecting the civilian.
And how many civilians are we talking about? How many people are currently staying in these internally
in fact,
displaced?
there's no accurate number of the internal displaced people here. because the last census was in 2006. That was talking about 2.5 million. But since that time, there's increasing of the IDPs by nature, because some of them, they produce themselves, their children here, and they remain in that 119 camps in different parts of Darfur. So the issue with the protection of civilian is not only on the IDPs, but also there's refugees. There's refugees from South Sudan, there's refugees from Chad, there's refugees from Central Africa, and they were divided into 10 refugee camps.
Yes.
So what we are looking for here is the protection of civilians. This represents the top of our priority. And then with the ceasefire, there is a foundation need for the ceasefire,
for the ceasefire,
and the mechanism for the monitoring this ceasefire.
Mr.
So without
Mr.
a clear mechanism of monitoring.
Mr. Adib Yusuf, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we're so grateful that you've joined us here, especially when the situation is quite uncertain. We're very grateful. Thank you so much. That was the former governor of Darfur speaking to us there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
As fighting continues in Ukraine, join our team for the latest developments.
The Russian lines are very close. In fact, we're hearing they're just maybe a kilometre away.
See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts in the app and get the full story with bbc.com/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
I'm on the Caribbean islands of St Kitts and Nevis, a destination sunseekers love to come to. But like many in this region, people here are considering if they want King Charles III to remain as their head of state. For more on this story, join me, Celestina Olulode, on BBC News.
Pope Francis is here in Budapest this weekend, his closest trip so far to the war in Ukraine. Both he and Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban want a rapid end to the conflict, but they stand far apart on the global response to migrants and refugees. Join me on BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. Former British Paralympian John McFall has been selected as the European Space Agency's first ever para-astronaut and is embarking on a groundbreaking new project to see if an astronaut with a physical disability can live and work in space. Rebecca Morrell reports.
My name is John McFall. I'm currently a trauma and orthopaedic registrar in Hampshire, and I'm just about to embark on a para-astronaut feasibility project with the European Space Agency.
Could the nurse in charge come to recess, please?
For the last 10 years, John's been working as a surgeon on orthopaedic wards.
Hiya, sir. How are you?
But his life's about to change.
My name's John.
Possibly forever. He's swapping a career where his feet are firmly on the ground for one that could take him out of this world. John's an astronaut candidate with a difference.
What are you feeling, John?
Amazing!
He's an amputee. He lost his leg in a motorcycle accident when he was a teenager. Now he's working with the European Space Agency to see if a person with a disability can go to space.
ESA had announced that they were looking for an astronaut with a physical disability, and I looked at the person specification and I kind of went, yeah, I've got that. I like doing that. I've got this degree. Yeah, I could do. Oh yeah, that sounds good. And I was like, wow, this sounds really interesting.
There you go. John's getting his first taste of space on a parabolic flight where you experience periods of weightlessness. It works by a plane making an extremely steep climb. It takes a team of 3 to control the manoeuvre. The plane then arcs to begin its descent, and that's where weightlessness kicks in.
Here we go. Here we go.
I joined John for his and my first flight.
Oh, help, help, help. I'm spinning. I want to come down. Oh, it is like the ground is moving away from you. It's really hard to actually control where you're going. As you can see, it's hard to master, but this is the closest that we can get to experience what being an astronaut is like. John, how are you finding it?
Look at this! I mean, where did you get this?
It's great.
How does this happen?
Oh, and down. Woo!
It's what we call a microprocessor knee. It uses hydraulics to control it.
John uses an extremely high-tech prosthesis. It's controlled by an app. The ESA project will focus on what needs to be adapted for John to go to space.
Will I wear a prosthesis? And if I wear a prosthesis, will I have to have something that will accommodate variations in volume in my stump? Will we have to adapt a spacesuit for a spacewalk? If so, in what way? So all these questions are things we do not have answers for.
The parabolic flight is John's first chance to see how his prosthesis responds to weightlessness.
In normal gravity, if you look here, the knee bends under normal gravity. But when you go into zero G, you'll probably see I'm floating around a lot with the leg straight because that gravity isn't there.
Are you sort of starting to predict what your prosthesis is going to do?
Well, I think at the moment I'm just predicting that it's going to stay out straight. Otherwise, I have to keep my good leg hooked over the prosthesis like this to hold it there. But every time, each parabola is a learning opportunity.
It is.
This isn't the first time John's pushed himself to the limits. He's a former medal-winning Paralympian sprinter.
I'm very much following my heart, and I'm following my curiosity, and I'm following my passion for science and life. This project and this journey will deliver a very strong message of what someone with a physical disability can do.
Being weightless isn't for everyone, but thankfully that's not the case with John.
So still happy with signing up to be an
Absolutely,
astronaut?
absolutely, yeah.
You haven't made a terrible mistake?
Not at all, I can't wait.
So for John McFall, watch this space. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
And we'll be back in the next few minutes with all the latest headlines, especially on the ongoing crisis in Sudan. So do stay with us here on BBC News.